Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right into an explosive 300-year saga of blood, iron, and revolutionary administration that entirely transformed the Indian subcontinent. We are unpacking the Delhi Sultanate. Think of this as a cinematic historical epic, a time of imposing fortresses, thundering cavalry, and intricate royal courts that shaped the entire destiny of medieval India. To understand how this massive empire began, we really have to look at what was happening right before it formed. Before the Sultanate, North India was basically a shattered mosaic of warring regional Rajput kingdoms, like the Chauhans, the Gehadavalas, and the Paramaras. They were fierce fighters, sure, but they totally lacked any centralized authority. This political fragmentation created an immense power vacuum, perfectly ripe for foreign intervention after the decline of the traditional tripartite powers. We're going to break this explainer down into 5 distinct chapters: the Mamluks, the Khaljis, the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids and Lodis, and finally, the empire's spectacular fall. Spanning exactly 320 years, from 1206 to 1526 CE, these 5 distinct dynasties of Turkic and Afghan origin essentially built the geopolitical reality of medieval India. It's a fascinating cycle of rapid rise, peak expansion, internal chaos, and inevitable contraction. Chapter 1. Mamluks, Forging the Sultanate. Our story actually kicks off in 1206 with the Mamluks. Now, the word Mamluk essentially translates to owned. These were military slaves of Turkic origin, and they rose to power not because of fancy royal bloodlines, but purely on merit, military skill, and the edge of their swords following the death of Muhammad Ghori. To fund their brand new empire, ruler Iltutmish introduced something brilliant: the Iqta System. Instead of draining the treasury paying out cash salaries, the state just assigned parcels of land, called Iqtas, to nobles and officers. They'd collect the revenue, keep a share to maintain their troops, and secure the realm. It was an absolute administrative masterstroke. But Iltutmish wasn't just a military tactician. He was a true visionary. He commissioned architectural wonders like the Qutb Minar complex, which perfectly blended Islamic arches with traditional Indian craftsmanship. He standardized the monetary system by introducing the silver tanka. And, astonishingly for the era, he nominated his highly capable daughter, Razia Sultan, to succeed him. She became the very first female sultan of Delhi, completely shattering centuries of patriarchal tradition, even while facing relentless pushback from the Turkish elites. Throughout this early era, though, there's this terrifying shadow looming over the northwest frontier: Genghis Khan and the Mongols. The Sultanate only survived by constantly pivoting its strategy. Iltutmish played it cool with diplomatic aloofness to avoid their wrath. Razia tried appeasement, and later rulers, like Balban, shifted to building heavily fortified defensive positions in the Punjab, basically creating a massive buffer that saved Delhi from total destruction. Chapter 2. Khaljis, Expansion and Economy. By 1290, the Khaljis violently seized the throne, putting an abrupt end to Turkic exclusivity. This opened the doors to a much more inclusive administration and kicked off a period of incredibly aggressive expansion. Under Alauddin Khalji, the Sultanate literally bursts out of its northern confines. His armies drove deep into the Deccan and South India, crushing powerful kingdoms in Warangal and Madurai. They didn't really bother trying to directly administer the Deep South, though. They just looted it heavily to funnel vast wealth back to the capital to fund their growing empire. So how do you manage a sprawling, suddenly super wealthy empire like that? Well, Alauddin's answer was an iron grip. He confiscated excess wealth from nobles so they couldn't afford to fund rebellions. He deployed a terrifyingly efficient network of spies known as the Barid-e-Mamluk. But his most famous reform happened right in the bustling markets of Delhi. He ruthlessly enforced fixed prices on everything, from basic grain to war horses. This allowed him to maintain a massive standing army on the cheap, while simultaneously taxing the peasantry a staggering 50% in straight cash. And he was incredibly strict about this. Merchants caught using false weights to cheat customers literally had the equivalent difference carved out of their own flesh. Yikes. Chapter 3. Tughlaqs, Ambitions and Decline. After the assassination of the last Khalji rulers, the Tughlaqs took power in 1320. Now, they rejected the old strategy of just looting the south. They wanted direct, centralized imperial control over the whole subcontinent. Under Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the territory explodes to its absolute peak, sweeping from Peshawar all the way down to Madurai. But, as you can imagine, this immense geographical overreach was a total logistical nightmare. Communication lines snapped, distant governors rebelled, and this unchecked ambition inevitably sowed the seeds of fragmentation.
The empire simply grew way too big to hold together. And the fatal blow to Tughlaq supremacy wasn't even internal overreach. It came from the outside. In 1398, the Central Asian conqueror Timur mercilessly sacked Delhi. It was literally an apocalyptic event for the city. For 5 days, Delhi faced brutal mass killings and looting. Timur left behind a plundered, devastated wasteland and hauled India's wealth and top artisans all the way back to Samarkand.
Which brings us to Chapter 4, Sayyids, Lodis, and Administration. From the smoldering ashes of Timur's raid rose the brief Sayyid Dynasty, eventually followed by the Afghan Lodis. Now, the main reason the Sultanate survived this long, despite shifting borders and constant dynastic turnover, was its highly complex administrative hierarchy. This was the true bureaucratic engine of the state. Power was spread across specialized departments. You had the Diwan-e-Wizarat managing the vast finances, the Diwan-e-Ars handling military recruitment, and religious affairs overseen by the chief Saad. It was a remarkably sophisticated machine of governance, one that also heavily patronized Sufi scholars, Persian literature, and forged a totally new Indo-Islamic cultural identity. But the Lodi rulers fundamentally shifted the political culture of that machine. See, the older Turkic rulers favored strict, absolute monarchical hierarchies. The Lodis, however, brought in their Pashtun tribal culture. They governed through diplomacy, mildness, and decentralized tribal councils. They treated powerful Afghan chiefs much more like peers than subjects. Chapter 5, The Final Fall. Ultimately, that localized governance just couldn't stop the storm brewing in the northwest. By 1525, political instability under the arrogant and deeply unpopular Ibrahim Lodi caused dissent to just boil over. The subcontinent reverted back to a fractured puzzle of weakened dynasties, rebellious Rajput confederacies, and independent provincial kingdoms. This total lack of a strong central authority laid the perfect geographical and political stage for a conqueror named Babur to invade. The climax of our story goes down at the pivotal First Battle of Panipat in April 1526. Babur faced a vast Lodi army that heavily outnumbered his own, but Babur wielded two absolutely devastating advantages. The first was the deadly Tughlaq flanking strategy. This was a rapid, highly coordinated cavalry maneuver designed to completely encircle and crush a much larger force from the flanks and rear. His second advantage literally changed Indian warfare forever. Babur brought in Ottoman-style Rumi artillery, led by master gunners. The sheer thunderous roar of these massive cannons and matchlocks completely shattered the traditional Indian elephant formations. The elephants panicked, turned around, and trampled their own troops, leading to a total collapse of the Lodi lines. Following his stunning victory at Panipat, Babur ruthlessly solidified his grip on power. He didn't just stop at defeating the Lodis either. He went right on to crush a massive Rajput confederacy at the Battle of Kanwa, and then swiftly wiped out the remaining Afghan resistance at Chanderi and Gagra. Through a potent mix of blood, innovative military strategy, and absolute sheer will, Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur established the mighty Mughal Empire. His arrival permanently closed the chapter on 300 years of the Delhi Sultanate, ushering in an entirely new epoch of Indian history. But history is rarely a clean break. As we look back at the genius of the Iqta land grants and Alauddin's strict market systems, we're left with a really provocative question. How much of the Delhi Sultanate's institutional DNA actually survived to fuel the rise of the Mughals? Because when we look closely at future Mughal land reforms, we are absolutely seeing the ghosts of the Sultanate still hard at work. Thanks for tuning into this explainer. I hope this helped bring a truly monumental era of history into focus.